إني ألقى الإناس في صومي وصلاتي ودعائي للرحمن وجميع الطاعات.
Today I wanted to focus on another part of the of what I would call the Islamic proof, yeah, which is the structural coherence of the Quran, which is something which is kind of not really spoken about too much. The structural coherence of the Quran, and I personally believe that this offers another layer of very powerful argumentation for someone to promote Islam and to basically add another layer of evidence for the Islamic narrative. Once again here, before we start, there's an important caveat that I have to put forward, which is that the Quran itself wasn't revealed all in one go. Yeah, so the Prophet obviously was 40 years old when when the Quran was revealed to him in the Ghar Hira, and over the span of 23 years, he received the Quran piecemeal, like piece by piece, until he died at the age of 63. Now this itself is interesting. Okay, this itself is interesting. Why? Because the thing is, you'll realize that the Quran, despite it being completed in terms of its structure, and despite it being also something which we know ended when it needed to be ended. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. In the Quran it says in chapter 5 verse 3, it says, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. It says that today I perfected your religion and I've completed my favor unto you, etc. So in other words, the Quranic message was fully revealed. Yeah, this in itself is an evidence for the validity of Islam. Why? Because in chapter 5 verse 67 of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it says, يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل ذلك فما بلغت رسالته والله يعصمك من الناس. It says that, O Prophet, basically say to the people that which you have been revealed to you from your Lord, or has come down to you from your Lord, and if you don't do this, then you have not put forward, or you have not basically fulfilled your mission of sending the message. And then the interesting last part of the ayah is Wallahu ya'simuka minan nasi, that certainly Allah will protect you from the people. The Prophet Muhammad was engaged in warfare on a yearly basis. I think if you count it, probably about 2 wars a year. Yeah? So he had ample chance to be killed each time. The Quran is saying Allah will protect you from the people. You get it? So the first point of interest here is how comes he didn't die midway? How could anyone guarantee that it's not like today's world. The Prophet actually, when there was because it was mostly, for the most part, maybe 99% of it, was defensive war. Yeah? So for the most part, when the Prophet was going out there, he was going out himself. It wasn't people going out on his behalf. When he went out, each time there was a chance he'd be killed. Each time he could be killed. How comes the Quran is being so confident here and saying that Allah will protect you from the people? In other words, you'll be protected, you will not be killed. This is an interesting thing and a very confident thing to do. In fact, it's tantamount to a prediction of the future. And it shows you, once again, the veracity and the validity of the Islamic message. Another thing that came to my mind was in regards to this whole issue of death. In chapter 2 and chapter 62, the Prophet Muhammad, basically he was in interaction with Jewish tribes at the time, and many of them, there was peace agreements which were broken and stuff like that with the Jewish people. So the Quran came to basically criticize those particular Jews at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, yeah? And basically, as you may know, part of the Jewish creedal belief is that they are the chosen people, yeah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sends down in 2 parts of the Quran. One part He says, if you think that you are basically the chosen people sent from Allah, فَتَمَنَّوْا الْمَوْتِ, so wish for death. Yeah? Now this might sound a bit, what's going on here, right? Let me tell you what's happening. He's saying wish for death. And then he says something interesting, and that's the secondary part of the ayah. In chapter 2 it says, وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوْنَهُ أَبَدًا بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. They will never be able to, they will never be wishful or hopeful of death because of what their hands have put forward. And in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, chapter 62 of the Quran says, وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوْهُ أَبَدًا بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ, without the two noons. But anyways, it's the same message really, that they will never really ask for death. So why is it they'll never ask for death? Because of what their hands have put forward. Now what's this got to do with anything? Basically it's saying, it's making a prediction that those particular Jewish people who had broken the peace agreement would never say, I want to die, basically. These words, I want to die. If a Jewish person came out and said it, he would have disproven the Quran. Why did he do that? If they really hated, Islam and this was clear animosity because at one point there was a breaking of the peace agreement. They could have easily come out. That shows you because the Quran says in other part of the Quran, يَعْرَفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرَفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم. They basically know him like they know their sons. So in other words, the Quran was asserting that those particular Jews believed that the Quran was true, right? But that they would never come out and say it openly. So in that way, when the Quran makes the claim that they will never come out and say that we want to die, that's a prediction of the future, which can easily be disproven. All that it needs is one person to come out from the Jewish community, of those particular Jewish people, and say, I want to die. Okay, I want to die. Literally, that's all that would have had to happen, and then the Quran would have been discredited. But that didn't happen, which does show, once again, that the author of the Quran knew the psychologies of the people. And there's, this once again, there's other examples of this. Examples, for example, of the Walid ibn al-Mughira, which in Surah Al-Muddathir, chapter 74 of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions إِنَّهُ فَكَّرَ وَقَدَّرَ ثُمَّ قُتِلَ كَيْفَ. This whole narrative of Walid ibn al-Mughira. Basically, the Quran is saying again that he's going to go to the hellfire. And Walid ibn al-Mughira is going to the hellfire. Meaning he's not going to die upon Islam. So, once again, he could have discredited Islam by coming forward and saying, okay, I'm Muslim now. And the same thing with Abu Lahab. This person could have come forward and said this, but the Quran is saying generally that this is not going to happen. So this is something which we could possibly refer back to the old lecture, because it goes into kind of like a prediction of the future. But it also demonstrates that the author of the Quran, he knew the psychologies of the human beings. And he's challenging human beings. I mean, think of it. This is something really which I find fascinating. Now, the Quran, it challenges human beings with great confidence to do certain things. And when it talks of the future, it talks very confidently. And this is a part of the narrative here, or the evidence base we use, to show that the Quran has an author which knows the future, basically. So this is point one. Point two now, talking about the structure of the Quran specifically, which I wanted to sort of highlight a little bit, which is interesting. As we said, the Quran came piecemeal, it didn't come all at one go, yeah? But despite the fact that the Quran came piece by piece, you'll find that there are incredible continuities that exist within the Quranic discourse. From the beginning, Surah Al-Fatiha, until the end, which is Surah Al-Nas, chapter 114. These surahs came at a time or in circumstances which no one could have predicted, because some of them contain questions inside of them which the Prophet ﷺ had to basically answer on the spot. So there were lots of questions that the Prophet was asked and he had to answer in the form of the Quran. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask you about the soul, in Surah Al-Isra. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ ذُو الْقَرْنَيْنِ. They ask you about Dhul Qarnayn in chapter 18 of the Quran. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They ask you about drinking and gambling in chapter 2 of the Quran. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ. They ask you about the new moons. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ this. They ask you about this. So each time the Quran had to come forward and basically provide an answer. So it couldn't have been pre-planned. Now bear that in mind when I tell you now that the Quran is composed of 114 chapters. If you look properly, you'll find that the Quran from the beginning to the end is bunched into different groups. It's kind of like the stars in the sky, if you think about it. And I was reading a book written by I think it was an English person. Yeah. I was quite surprised that this person had actually come to very good conclusions, or interesting conclusions. His name is Robert Farron, yeah? He wrote a book called The Structure of the Quran or something like that. I was quite interested at his observations. It's something, I think the book is called The Structure of the Quran or something like that. And he was saying that the Quran has an interesting structure, and that basically you'll find that the Quran is compartmentalized into different groups. And this is my analogy now. Like if you think of it like if you look into the night sky and you look at the stars, you'll find no clear pattern maybe on first sight. But if you look more closely, you'll find that they are arranged into constellations. Now the Quran is something similar, because if you look at Surah Al-Baqarah, for example, Surah Al-Baqarah is very similar to Surah Al-Imran, which is right next to it in the tartib, or the sequencing of the Mus'haf. So chapter 2 is very similar to chapter 3 in its lexical phrases, and it's basically its composition and style. All of it is very similar. Chapter 3 and chapter 4 are very similar. Chapter 4, so all of the surahs that are actually arranged next to each other, you'll find that the taste or the flavor of the surah is similar to the surah that comes before it and the surah that comes after it. And this is very, very interesting of the Quranic discourse. You'll find that also, in addition to this reality, and this is something I read in this interesting book, once again the Westerners are coming with these conclusions, which I find interesting. I don't know if this person is Muslim. His name is Neil Robinson, He writes another book, I can't remember the name of the book, I can't remember the name of the book, but I only read the chapter which talks about structure, because I just wanted to get, an Orientalist perspective. I don't know if he's an Orientalist, but basically he says that in his view, and he looked at the works of Islahi, which is one person, I think, he's an Indian person, and he says that each surah, he calls it dovetailing, dovetails the next surah. So each chapter of the Quran is connected intricately with the next chapter. So the beginning and the ending of the chapters are connected, and the ending of one chapter is connected with the next chapter. Now this is really interesting, because if you think about it, if you really think about it, how could it be arranged in that way if you don't know what the future is going to be? Simple question. How can you spend your time arranging the Quran in that particular way if you don't know what the future is going to be? And I'll give you one easy example of what I'm saying. So Surah Al-Fatiha ends with guide us to the straight path, the path of you, those of you are favored. Chapter 2 starts with basically Hudan lil-Muttaqeen, which is the people you are favored. It ends with good people as well, because it says, wal mu'minun in the same chapter 286 of Surah Al-Baqarah. And it talks about the books as well, the books of previous messages, which we were talking about before, like the Torah, the Injil, etc. In the next chapter, chapter 3, it talks about the books. أنزل عليك الكتاب بالحق مصدقا لما بين يديه وأنزل التوراة والإنجيل. It talks about the books and the messages which are connected. And then at the end of the surah, chapter 3, it talks once again about إن سمعنا منادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم, about a particular prophet, which is Prophet Mohammed. So it's all dovetailed, you could say, or connected intricately in such a way as would resemble like a pearl necklace. All of it is intricately connected to the next part, or a puzzle, really. All of it is put together perfectly to create the overarching image. And the question that you can then ask is, and why is it like that? How could it be like that when the author of if the author of the Quran was a human being and these things were happening to him situationally, circumstantially, and he was basically forced to respond on the spot? How could it be that he has the time or even the ability to connect it together intricately in this way? This is a question, and you'll find almost with no exception that the Quran has this sequencing. Surah Al-Fatiha even, subhanAllah, if you look at Surah Al-Fatiha, which is chapter 1 of the Quran, which we believe is the most, despite its brevity, it is the most powerful surah of the Quran. If you look at this surah, it's composed of 7 ayat. And in the 7 ayat, you'll find that there are 3 different kinds of narrative voice. The first it talks about God in the third person, and then it moves to second person narrative voice, and then so there's interesting transitions, or what you call in Arabic iltifat, which is a rhetoric term, which we'll come back to in a second. This iltifat is really interesting. The second point is that you'll find that there are 3 different types of this is going to go into a bit of technical jargon, but if you can just be patient with me just for a little bit, I can drive the point home. Basically, you have, generally speaking, 2 kinds of sentence type in Arabic. You have jumla ismiya and jumla fa'aliyya. You have a kind of like a nounal sentence, and you have a verbal sentence. The first 3 ayat of Surah Al-Fatiha are Jumal Ismiya. There are 3 noun sentences, yeah? And the last 3 are Jumal Fa'liya. They are verbal sentences. The one in the middle is a Jumla Ismiya bi khabar al-muqaddamin, yeah? It's basically a noun sentence with a khabar, which is meant to be the news of the sentence, which is put in the opposite place. Now, what does this mean? Bear with me, yeah? And it goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. The Prophet was asked one time, who are those people who have earned your anger? Because in the last part of that surah it says, not the path of those who have earned your anger. So it said, the Jewish people. Wait a minute, it's anti-Semitism? No, I'll tell you what he meant by that. Basically, in the Islamic theology, it's seen that the Jewish clergy of that time, and this trickles down, have a tendency to knowledge, yeah, and not necessarily action. Okay? So there isn't any practical applying of the knowledge that they have. And then he was asked, as narrated reliably in Tirmidhi, who are ad-dallin? Who are the ones who have gone astray? So he replied, the Christians, yeah? Why? Because it's seen the opposite, that what they believe in the Trinity and these kind of things are completely irrational. So they haven't got any basically knowledge. They're rationally deplete of any substantive knowledge. Okay? So basically here in the Quran it says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا, chapter 2 verse 143. So we have made you a middle and balanced nation. We're not meant to be like all knowledge and no action, and we're not meant to be all action and no knowledge. Therefore, going back to what I was saying in Surah Al-Fatiha, the structural composition of Surah Al-Fatiha being 3 verses constructed of Jumal Ismiya. And Jumal Ismiya means that there are noun or sentences. And in Arabic, yufid al-ilm. It basically, it's beneficial they're informative sentences. So they give you knowledge, yeah? And the other ones, yufid al-amal, because it's verbs. Verbs are doing words, yeah? And the one in the middle is kind of like a combination of both. You get it? So in the 7 verses you've got 3 verses which basically are knowledge-based verses, and you've got 3 verses which are verbal verses, yeah, which are doing kind of verses, and you've got 1 verse that combines the 2 different thought processes. In that way, the message and the structural composition of the Quran, or of that particular surah, is incredibly matched. Now, when you speak, you can't really think of doing this. It's difficult to do this. Think about it. If someone is just speaking, I'm just speaking right now. I'm not counting and doing this. Like I don't know how many times I said what. You know what I mean? So it's very difficult for someone. This is the kind of thing in the Quran which we find incredibly difficult to replicate. And this goes back to our inimitability challenge. Like get a verse like it and call your witnesses if you are in fact truthful. This is what the Quran says in Surah Al-Baqarah.